Um, Morning. Thank you for coming here. Egun on, eskerrik asko zure presentziatik. I will present you um, some results, my results of 10 years, a 10-year experiment in Mediterranean area relating forest and herbivory. Well, as is known, there are two major concerns in global two major concerns that are biodiversity crisis or biodiversity loss and global fire crisis. And usually, often, we in Mediterranean, we associate Mediterranean ecosystems to dry and poor ecosystems, and we associate Mediterranean ecosystems to forest fires. But with global warming, large fires are spreading on the planet to other ecosystems, such as boreal ones. So we can ask us, what if it turned out that this increase in the frequency and intensity of disturbances had an underlying historical cause predating climate change? So we start our experiment in many projects focused in fire prevention in Mediterranean area. So in Mediterranean area, because woody vegetation has historically been raised, we design a nature-based solution based in grazing to restructure structure vegetation. At present, farming intensification due to the industrialization of grazing leads to an abandonment of landscape, and this leads to an encroachment. But the encroachment is global, and the frequency of intensity of wildfires increase in around the world, like in Canada, Chile, Australia, and so on. So with that, we ask us if is current livestock capable to change the linefied vegetation. This is our question. So to test that, we reintroduce livestock as a tool for changing the structure and composition of vegetation, and reintroduce herds collaborating with farmers and shepherds in 5 afforested areas from 80 to 120 years ago. What's our methodology? We work in the Catalan culture area in Mediterranean, and we designed a multi-scale stratified sampling based in plots and transects. And in these areas, we designed some some areas. Inside there, we measure the density of herbivores based in semi-structured interviews on farmers and measuring faces by transects, wild faces by transects. After having these densities, we design many plots to measure forest structure and composition, and inside these plots, these are another minor plots to measure shrub dynamics, shrub composition and structure, and finally we take samples in little plots, cutting grasses to determine biomass, floristic composition, and the impact of herbivory. In the three scale of the three strata, vegetation strata, we designed some indicators of herbivory and vitality to understand the impact of the perturbation. Finally, in the same plots of when we took samples of grasses, we took soil samples to determine soil nutrients and to understand what about soil fertility. Well, what were our results? Our results indicate three main ways across herbivores influence vegetation. The first one is the most known, the most common, that is the herbivory of consumption. That is the consumption of leaves and teeth, okay? And in this case, I see you the effects not only in grasses, but in shrubs that is less known. This is a common shrub in Mediterranean area. And our results indicate that even in a species few palatable, when we force the herbivores to with a high stocking rate, herbivores can eat these non-palatable species and affect them. The second way is we named chemical herbivory. So is the herbivory mediated by the changes in soil nutrients, by fertility. So in some species, for example, Rosmarinus officinalis, that is a common shrub in Mediterranean area, but linked to oligotrophic soils, when we introduce nutrients, we can diminish the population, diminishing the vitality or leading to the death some individuals. So the population of these shrubs decreases. And finally, there is a mechanical herbivory that is produced when herbivores go across the grasslands or the woodlands, and they crash shrubs and trees. This in domestic herbivores, there is here. This is a little effect, significant, but a little effect, different from some wild herbivores that has mega herbivores has a greater effect, like for example elephants. So the selective grazing only takes place at medium and low densities, and in high densities we can influence structure and composition of shrub strata and some trees and some trees too. So domestic livestock can modify woody vegetation, and this effect is density dependent. So with that, we can understand that the opening function, the opening vegetation function of domestic herbivores can be analogous to wild ones. Okay. What about with phytobulbs? This is a better known subject, but we measure these two. And in grazed areas, we can diminish this phytobulbs clearly, and with that, we can change the rothermel model, fire rothermel model from 6 to 1 or 2. So it's to a high prone vegetation or high fire prone vegetation or high speed, high fire speed to a low fire speed. Okay, and what we found about the relationship between fertility and shrub structure? As I told just now, there is a phytotoxicity that that is due to soil stoichiometry. And this phytotoxicity created especially by phosphorus, as we can, for example, see in this central figure. For example, this phytotoxicity in case of Rosmarinus officinalis, we can relate the stocking rate with when a stocking rate increases, when phosphorus increases, the vitality of this shrub decreases. But the global vitality of the whole community increases. So there is a reactivation of the cycling of nutrients that favorishes all the community, while some oligotrophic species decreases. These species are very flammable, and the opening of vegetation in this case is very clear. And in the left, we can observe how then the global number of individuals of shrubs decreases according to stocking rate. So this is very interesting because we can act in low palatable species that usually herbivores don't consume. So with phytotoxicity, we can change this structure of vegetation as this dynamics of population. So we found that shrubland without browsers accelerates plant succession by the low return of nutrients. And with that, we linked the theories of ecological stoichiometry and mosaic change in woody grasslands. But if we introduce these high densities of herbivores in forest, we ask us, what about biodiversity? Because usually herbivores in forest are considered as bad things because affects regeneration and maybe can affect biodiversity and so on. While herbivores in open vegetation improves biodiversity. But so what about in our areas of experimentation? Well, the effects on herbaceous stratum is in many ways. For example, flammability decreases. Flammability decreases for many ways. One way is when we measure fresh weight and dry weight, we made a relationship, and this relationship between fresh and dry weight increases in grazed areas. So herbivores act as activator of nutrient cycling and water cycling, and this leads community to a less flammable community. And the effect what is the effect on the diversity? Well, in vegetal diversity, clearly silvopastoral ecosystems are more diverse than afforested areas, than previous afforested areas. When richness increases very clearly, and in this graphic, you can see in a gradient from low to high pressure and short to long-term grazing, a clear increase on biodiversity and indicator spaces and open vegetation indicator spaces. Well, we made all these results from more than 3,000 results in shrub strata and more than 4,000 measures in grass. So we made these cuttings, and we measure the weight and the degree and weight of these 4,000 measures species for species. So what we found when we analyzed the global vegetation assemblies, well, there is, in this case, there is two examples. An example about ovine and caprine, so a mixture of grazers and browsers, and a bovine case, so a most grazer case. In the two cases, we found an inverse relationship between the fire-related spaces like this in control areas and before grazing in this axis, inverse to open space species dependent of grazing. This, in the two cases, this is a clear tendency, trend, and grazing species predominate when we open space, and this is mediated by light and nitrogen especially, and zoochorin. So herbivores incorporate grazing species from the agroforestry mosaic reservoirs. And this recovery is very, very quickly and very clear. In these photos, you can see a gradient of herbivore pressure to low to height and short to long-term grazing in experimental sites. This is an example of a Mediterranean pine forest without herbivores, so with herbivore extinction, with post-fire post-fire regeneration with more than 10,000 trees per hectare, 10,000 trees per hectare. So this is a very dangerous area. In these cases, do you have photos in the top before the experiment, and when we go down, we can observe the effects after grazing of many years for a sub-Mediterranean area, a Mediterranean area with cold winter, and a coastal and more thermic area. Well, for that, we try to determine the change thresholds measuring densities of herbivores. So we calculate the metabolic weight density of wild herbivores and domestic ones in 800 areas. This is the first time that the first time that we have a complete or a big sampling of stocking rates in the Mediterranean area. So what we found, wild herbivores are practically extinct with densities near zero, and domestic livestock, so market density, I name that as market density, is a very few density, and is much more or less similar to the wild densities of wild herbivores in Spanish protected areas. But what about if we compare that with other other areas around the world? Well, if we compare with some models based in net primary production, we have a model that is a theoretical model. This model has a little bit more higher densities, but the empirical model based in temperature and precipitation shows clear higher densities, and they are similar to those that we used to prevent wildfires, forcing hares to consume vegetation. In this area, we are in high and very high densities, and these high and very high densities, surprisingly, are in the same margin, same values that we found in Pleistocene open systems or in present systems like African savanna. So we conclude that Mediterranean woody communities present a critical deficit of wild herbivores, and certain impoverished habitats was described in a state of abandonment. So that is the same that in a herbivore dysfunctionality. We conclude that because when we observe this quickly and high recovery of plant species, often plant vegetation species, is so quickly and so so important that only can provide from an ancient open ecosystem. We can't introduce so many species from a new situation without an old environment. So these forested lands were open systems, and these communities were phytosociologically described in a state of abandonment. So we need to review phytosociologically, we need to review our description of these communities as as original, because they aren't. Well, so herbivores' historical disappearance during the Holocene and Anthropocene is one of the underlying causes for ecosystems to switch from herbivory to fire dominance. So the dominance of fire in Mediterranean ecosystems is not the normal situation, but is the situation because the historical extinction of biocenosis. We conclude too that the reduction of flammability is through 4 ways: biomass removal, structural changes in vegetation, increased water content, and modification of species assemblies. So it's clear that we need to restructure herbivorous communities with the reintroduction of mixed hares and the coexistence of wild ones, of wild worsers, to restore functional diversity. For that, we need to refocus in conservation policies. So we consider that is rather than the biocenosis, than the habitat that must be preserved. So we need to preserve function versus structure. And for that, we need new policies to support the extensive livestock practice, because those herbivores are the present herbivores, because the Pleistocene herbivores are extinct. What about if we brought our focus to the in a global perspective? Well, our question is, have we lost the baseline reference? Well, we made a work with some colleagues here of Basque Center of Climate Change, where we calculate the densities of herbivores in Spanish protected areas, and we made a relationship with net primary production. And we found that the current abundances are much lower than estimated baselines by models, and much lower than carrying capacity. In some Spanish protected areas, the densities are accomplish the models, but this is a case where herbivores can um, move between winter and summer areas, and some factors that permits these high densities. We mapped that in for Spain, and this is the current densities, very low, and this is the baseline that we calculate that is very much higher. And if we compare with other works around the world, we have this work of Flogard that measure densities in Africa, and they found that only Africa accomplished the model's prediction according net primary production. All the other continents had an important extinction of wild herbivores and has very low densities. And this situation is because we need to review our ecological history. We need to focus in ecological history. And of course, we are in the Holocene, and in the Holocene in Europe, there is a spread of herds of different species around all Europe. This is clear. These domestic herbivores in that time could do the function of wild ones previously extinct. But more recently, in modern era and Anthropocene, the current densities are going down. And not only that, the best problem is that the proportion of grazers to non-grazers are monogastric or industrial livestock, the grazers is decreasing. So we have less herbivores grazing in ecosystems. In detail, we can focus in the work of Soto in Spain too, and we can observe a stable stocking rates from 18th to 19th centuries. After that, we can observe a decrease because the influence of liberal revolution that leads to a competition between agricultural lands and farmers. And after that, with the introduction of agrochemicals, there is a little increase. After that, we have a decrease because the Civil War. And finally, the introduction of industrialization rises all the species. But if we see that in detail, we can find again that from a half of animals grazing in ecosystems in the past, in the beginning of last century, and now we have a very little proportion grazing in the ecosystem. So we have lost a lot of herbivory in our ecosystems, and we can see this in this graphic when the industrialization policies were introduced, and we had a special height increase in monogastric species, not in grazers, but in monogastrics. So here we are we can name I name that as old addiction era or mid addiction era. Okay, if we go back to the Pleistocene, we can find that searching in pollen records around Europe, we can find all these species that the main of them are extinct. So uh, in and in so there was a work not only in South and Central Europe, but this is a work in Greenland, and they found in soil sediments, they found by DNA techniques, all they found open vegetation ecosystem in northern Greenland with a very diverse community of herbivores. So in the Pleistocene, we had open ecosystems in Europe in a climate that is very similar to present climate. In that situation, we had grazers, browsers, and clearers. So we had three functions in herbivory that similar that we found in our experiment, but in a broader scale. And for example, we had proboscideans. Proboscideans they had a Miocene explosion of functional biodiversity, diversity, was triggered by their geographical expansion beyond Africa. And it's interesting that remark that ecomorphological innovations drove niche differentiation, and multi-species sites were common. Okay, and only when humans arrived to the each continents in this work of Cantalapiedra in Africa, Russia, America, is becomes the total extinction of those species. There is another work, a recent work, very interesting, that that explores what about the temperate forest in Europe, and they are based too in pollen records, and they found that light woodland and open vegetation represented in last interglacial period represented more than 50% cover of Europe, 50%, the half of cover of Europe. So this idea that temperate forest was closed forest now is in discussion. And they found that the degree of openness is only partially linked to climatic factors, and they conclude that is due to the herbivore function. Because the temperate forest was historically heterogeneous, and that is concordant with the present European biodiversity that is linked to open species. Here you have a representation of four situations that they represent in an aesthetic way. And here on the left, do you have the proportion of land cover type with open vegetation and light woodland that dominates the landscape. Only alpine regions has more closed vegetation. Well, if we think about restoring functional diversity, we can find other works like this work in last interglacial 2 that study the richness of herbivore species and carnivore species. The richness, as you can see, is much decreases a lot to the present, and richness was is 51% lower, and megafauna, the global megafauna community biomass is 95% lower than in the last interglacial. So this leads to a herbivore loss of functional biodiversity of 80%, as you can see in this diagram, the loss of functional diversity of herbivores is very high, and also in carnivores. And this leads to another ecological situation that is now a concern, that is vegetation consumption. Vegetation consumption is reduced in an 80%. Here you have a representation of all the last interglacial species. Only the black ones are alive today, so the most are extinct. And here you have the present species, and in the blue ones are very restricted in very small areas. Well, and finally, we can it's interesting the work of Ratalak, that they use the research in soils to understand the evolution of climate in the Earth. So they propose that there was a Cenozoic cooling due to the herbivory, to the coevolution between grazing herbivores and grasslands. So they studied soils on 5 continents, and they conclude that grasslands appear to have created evolved soils, so molly soils, very rich in carbon, that cool the atmosphere by different ways. One way, a very important way, is the increased carbon sequestration in the soil. Molly soils can sequester carbon until 1 meter deep, when usually forest soils accumulate carbon until 10 centimeters deep. There is to a higher surface albedo from 14 in forest to 17 to 50% in grasslands. And there is to a reduction of evapotranspiration, so an atmospheric dry up, because grasslands in dry seasons, the grass are dry, and the color is more clear, so there is a higher albedo. And in the we can see this this theory of coevolution between grasses and herbivores from they study soils, especially the calcareous the calcareous deposits, the calcareous fossil pues no sé, depósitos calcáreos. Yes, limestone, yes, calcareous limestone deposits, yes. Yes, and measuring the depth of these fossil calcareous deposits, they can correlate that with ancient climate, to more dry climates, to more wet climates. The calcium goes deeper and deeper. So we can correlate that with ancient climates, and we can correlate it with fossil records, with low-crowned teeth and small molars to very high crown teeth and molars, and to very short feet to very high, to speed up in the grasslands. And there is a correlation too with the vegetation structures like rhizomes and interapical meristems and so on. And of course, phytoliths that prevents consumption from herbivory because they promote erosion in teeth. So they conclude that there is an evolution of soils to molly soils, and all that could drive the Cenozoic cooling. Well, with all of that, what are our future prospects? Well, now we are focusing in our research on our herbivorous communities from the Pleistocene to the Miocene, linking past and present climates, using ancient DNA, among other techniques, to emulate their diversity and functionality, and to suggest an adaptive management to climate change. Well, that's all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ferran. Apologies because I forgot to introduce you.
Mm-hmm. No, yes, it's, no, I think it's, no, no, it's this. Yeah.
So you are presenting mechanism, a function and mechanism by which people, no matter if it's water or but you are presenting a system of not only actually promote a more open landscape and the absence of
Browsers.
drives for change in the landscape for the flammability. So we have this dichotomy between either biomass is consumed by fire, by the prevalence of these flammable species, or herbivores not only remove biomass but also promote less flammable species. And I think this is very interesting because it matches to observations, for example, done by Lucas Capauza and William Bond in and you are proposing a functional mechanism.
Hello, Pablo, can you hear us? Sorry, it's just we cannot hear you from here. All the people online, we're having difficulties to hearing you. You sound very far, Pablo, if you, or whomever is speaking. If you can come closer.
Yeah. So you were hearing Ferran, but you were not hearing me, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So which part did you miss? I don't know where.
I think all. I think all of it.
Okay. No, I was just highlighting that the mechanisms of the mechanism that Ferran is proposing. The functional mechanism for the maintenance of open ecosystems go beyond the usual trampling, and it goes into also a chemical regulation of species that don't tolerate herbivory well, but that are pyrogenic and that are very flammable.
alternating with a scenario with herbivores, but also with species that are chemically kind of influenced by herbivores so that they are less flammable. Okay, so this would match into this dilemma stated by William Bond and by Julie Garcia Pausas of fire versus herbivores as main consumers of the organic matter in the open ecosystems. And
Yes. Do you have any question about? Sorry?
There is a question in the audience asking what kind of vegetation the control is. The control treatments where there were no herbivores.
What were the control treatments?
Yeah, what type of vegetation? What type of forest?
Well, the forest that we
Espera,
work in,
habla mejor aquí.
we work in Pinus alepensis forest. Okay, so control areas was Pinus alepensis forested areas without herbivory. Forested, not planted, forested. Yes, forested from 80 to 120 years ago. 80 years to 120 years ago. There was ancient Mediterranean vineyard or yes, vineyard or ancient agricultural areas abandoned 1 century ago, or grass rangeland areas exploited by forestry or by herds, but abandoned one century ago.
Yes. Again.
So I was thinking about this experiment. It's one experiment in this pine tree forest. I don't know. I mean, probably you already mentioned. I didn't take. Did you change the intensity or frequency of this?
Daniel Montoya is asking here that if for this experiment, if the experimental intervention implied a change in the intensity and density of
Different levels of
herbivores.
raising pressure, frequency of.
Yes. We we work with 5 areas, and in each area we introduced a different level of herbivore pressure. Okay.
It was manipulated.
It was manipulated, but it's not exactly a laboratory experiment, because we agree that with farmers, and we work with farmers. So we work with them from 10 years. So because as I told previously, that comes from fire prevention programs by grazing. Okay, so it's an experiment related to reality, to more or less the reality, the farming reality in the Mediterranean.
I think regarding that, if you want to say.
No,
I think regarding that question, it is interesting the diagram that you showed on grazing intensities and the market intensity. Maybe you can go back to that, because I know from conversations with Ferran, this manipulation stems from a market density that is low. So, and I think you can elaborate on that, how that has changed, how the densities used to be higher when people were poorer, but now that the countryside is empty and people have a lot of pastures to select from, the market density like the amount of animals that people are putting in the landscape is lower in order to maximize the body condition of the animals. And this is influencing also this loss of herbivory, because like the animals are not being forced to eat everything, because the rural population has caused a lot of pasture to be available. And this is why the manipulation in his experiments were increasing the density of
Yes.
herbivores.
The question is that in the historical densities were forced by overpopulation in rural areas. So the fencing was a virtual fencing, because one herd has the limit when another herd was the neighbor had another herd. So the densities were higher, but they are organic densities, because as I show here, there is here in this area in the 18th or 19th century, they had a multifunctional grazing. So animals serve to not only to obtain meat. In fact, meat is maybe the a very few. It was very few important, and most important was animals to work for labor, animals for transport, and animals for other services. Especially very important was the linkage between animals and fertility in agriculture. So animals were used to fertilize, to improve the productions in agriculture areas. After that, they produce many services and products as wool and so on. So meat was a very residual product, very different from the present, that all the market is focused in producing meat. When we produce meat, we disconnect from the ecosystems, and it's for that we don't grass ecosystems, and it's because that we have these very low ratios, because farmers can permit themselves to lose money, and these forcing rates are possible because we agree with them some not especially money, and in this case, but a counterpart. We agree with them some exchange compensation in material or improvement of forest areas and so on. But when farmers go to these high densities, they lose money in the market. The problem is that farming now is the problem is that extensive livestock is unable to compete with market. Is another organic system. It's a systemic system that can't compete with market.
Very quick. You mentioned that grazing increases diversity of indicator species, but and wondering what type of species it you what type of groups, and the other one is whether you have a sense if there is any type of competition in the experimental sites between domestic herbivores and wild.
Okay. Yeah, interesting questions. He asked, Daniel asked me about if there was any competition between wild and domestic herbivores. And the first one is about what kind of diversity we measured. Well, we only measured vegetation, plant species. Now we are working in a new project where in an experiment, and we are measuring DNA in the soil. So we are making a metagenomics of the soil to measure microorganisms, bacteria and fungi, okay, and to essay to understand the linkage between soils and carbon stockage with herbivory, and especially to understand the functionality of the herbivory by the DNA genes, okay? But in that experiment that I presented today, we only measured, because the budget was limited, okay, only vegetation. The second question is about the competition between domestic and wild herbivores. When in Mediterranean areas, we don't found any competition because wild herbivores are practically extinct, so there isn't competition. Okay, but if we are focused in other areas like, for example, in the Pyrenees or Pre-Pyrenees, areas more thermics with higher densities of herbivores, in general, there isn't competition because, in general, the competition is very few because the most of wild species are browsers and the most of domestic species are grazers. So there is a complementation of diets.
And actually, if you go back to the diagram of, I think was towards the end of the extinct species, it was on the double paper. On the extinct species in Europe, you will see that the extant species the extant wild species in Europe are mostly strict browsers, and there is also like a market reason for that because we have been reflecting on that. Humans usually have tried to domesticate grazer species because they achieve larger biomasses in the ecosystems. So these are the ones that we can get more from. You know, domesticating a species is difficult. It's very difficult. It's a very long process that takes up to thousands of years. So humans apparently have focused on grazers because these are the dominant niches in the ecosystems. It wouldn't make sense, for example, in Africa to domesticate dik-tiks because they are tiny and they are not producing a large biomass. It would be much more reasonable to domesticate a wildebeest because there are 1.5 million in the Serengeti ecosystem. And these are always or almost always grazers. The case of the goat, I think, is a little bit special because goats can use woody vegetation, and this is why they were domesticated. And for example, you find goats being much more abundant in islands in the Mediterranean than in continental lands, because in islands they cannot migrate. So you will need to graze on the woody vegetation. Whereas in areas where you can migrate, it makes much more sense to have cows or to have sheep that are strict grazers.
Any more questions?
If there are no questions, we have been already. Sorry. If there are no more questions, even not from the chat, we have been already 1 hour here, which was the scheduled time. So we can wrap up. I would thank you again for this very interesting and enlightening talk, and which also is very relevant for BC3, I think. And I keep on working with Ferran, so of course now we are available for questions, but if you have further interest later on, I am sure we can discuss on that and we can do lots of things together. So thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you.